Welcome to the Higher Ed Demand Gen podcast, helping higher education marketing leaders share knowledge about learning, strategies, and tactics that are relevant today. See what you can learn today by listening to one of our episodes.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Higher Ed Demand Gen podcast, hosted by Concept 3D. If you like our content, please follow and subscribe to us. As always, I'm Shiro Hattori, your host. And today I'm thrilled to talk about the difference between Waffle brands and higher ed differentiation. So for the topic, I'm excited to have Suzan Brinker join us. She is the CEO at Vive Higher Education, host of the Higher Ed Leaders podcast, and also a recent author of The Pass Fail, The Urgent Need for Strategic Leadership in Higher Education. Suzan, welcome to the show. And can you please tell us what you love about higher ed?
Oh my gosh, what do I love about higher ed? Super nerdy answer, heavy, headed intellectual answer, I think would be that I think there's no institution that transforms lives quite like higher education takes someone who maybe had a difficult start in life and really gives them wings, right? And allows them to reinvent themselves in a really beautiful way. That's what happened to me. That's what I love about higher education. I think it's a unique institution in American history and in the history of our species in the world, and being able to achieve that transformation at such scale. And then just, the more emotional answer is I just love being on college campuses. I mean, they're just the best. And walking into a dining hall and seeing all the students, or going to a football game or a volleyball game, which I love volleyball, and just seeing that school spirit and being on a campus on a cozy fall day, nothing beats that either.
I couldn't agree more. I love visiting CU Boulder's campus. It's my alma mater, and I feel the same way every time I'm there, for whether it's for a football game or for an event. It's just so it feels like home to be on campus. So couldn't agree more. Well, awesome. I know we got to just miss each other at AMA, but I know you presented on the topic, and I met some of your colleagues, and it was really great to get to know Vive Higher Education a little bit. But can you tell us a little bit more about your role there?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a co-founder and the CEO of Vive. Founded it 5 years ago. I had been an in-house marketing director at Penn State World Campus and at Northeastern for about 5 or 6 years total. And when I moved to the Boston area, I kind of couldn't stop with that entrepreneurial itch. I was like, what would happen if I started my own company? I could make an impact on multiple institutions at once. I also thought that I would maybe have more flexibility and more time for my kids, which ultimately is not at all what happened. But it's been really fun to just work really hard and see the impact that we can make on multiple different institutions at a time. So now we're a team of about 10 with a larger freelance, team that we work with very closely. So really about 30 people that work together very, very closely on an ongoing basis. We have clients all over the US, but really heavily focused still in New England. And we do enrollment marketing, some brand marketing, right? We help universities think about how are they going to grow, how are they going to survive, how are they going to expand their offerings in this really interesting time that we're in the world and in higher education.
No, absolutely. And yeah, I'm really glad we got to sync up for a little bit here. And I know that the title here today was, what's the difference between Waffle brands and higher ed differentiation? What is the difference, Suzan?
There isn't one. No. Well, we use this as a hook in our presentation at AMA Higher Ed, because we're talking about differentiation, and just recently was this massive waffle recall, and it turns out all these different brands of waffles had to be recalled because they were ultimately the same exact waffles. They just had different brands, and there was something wrong with them, and so ultimately all the waffles disappeared. And we were like, what's so different about higher education? If you look, beyond the brand, we are all kind of saying the same things and offering the same things as our competitors and as colleges and universities at large. I think it's a little bit overstated because each school still is a little bit more unique than literally the same waffle recipe, but we were trying to be a little bit fun there at the beginning of the presentation.
No, I mean, I think there's some truth in the numbers that you shared during your presentation, which I got to take a look at. I think you pulled some statistics that 98% of colleges and universities look alike to students. So that's like the perceived side, right? And 62% of higher ed leaders say that increased competition is making it harder to stand out and attract students. not to mention the cost of acquisition for a student has gone up significantly in the last 20 years. So, I mean, this all kind of just adds to more fuel to the fire about differentiation.
Mhm.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I think, one of the things that I talk about in the presentation is that there used to be sort of these traditional stratifiers of higher ed, which I kind of refer to the book by Roger Geiger, which is called The History of American Higher Education, from the founding to World War II, and then from World War II to the present. There are 2 volumes. Roger Geiger is the preeminent historian in higher ed, wrote these really great books. He was also my professor in my PhD program at at Penn State. And if you read the book right from the start, from the founding of Harvard College all the way through to the Industrial Revolution to the Second World War, you start understanding that the size of the higher education market in the United States at large, but also the size of each individual institution, is driven by 4 things. And those are: where is it located? What are the demographics that it draws? Thinking about some women colleges or colleges that were more focused on, adult learners, selectivity then, right, driving that as well. How hard is it to get into the school? And then finally, religious affiliation. So you can play a game like, what's a big selective Catholic university in the Northeast? Boston College. What about the Midwest? Notre Dame. What about the West? Gonzaga. And so you could kind of pull that through each of these tiers: different religious affiliations, no religious affiliations. And that really drove the market of higher education. But now in the last 20 years, patterns have changed. People are much more willing to move to go to college or grad school. Religious affiliation has become less relevant. There's a demographic cliff that we're all aware of, where we're going to have 15% fewer undergraduate students by 2026. And so everything is kind of changing, and the market is getting disrupted by that. And that is leading to more competition. And because we have more competition and fewer students to go around, we have to work so much harder to get new audiences to our campuses. And to get new audiences to our campuses, we have to differentiate. We can't look like 98% of other colleges and universities, or our chances of getting those students to be interested in us and enroll on our campuses is going to be significantly lower. So yeah, I think the last 20 years have been an intense time. And I don't have this stat, but you could probably see also an increase in, more CMOs being hired, just more marketing people being hired by colleges and universities to address that problem. And I think that problem is only going to get so much more acute in the next 10 years, 5 to 10 years, as, like I said, demographics continue to change, but also we have a problem where many people in this country now don't necessarily believe in the ROI of higher ed the way they used to. And there are other headwinds. So just differentiating is going to be critical when we want to survive among this increased competition, and, even competition from outside of our traditional institutions like EdTech, or, a big competitor is also the decision not to go at all and just go into a trade or do something, else that doesn't require a college degree anymore. So it's going to be an interesting time, and differentiation is going to be critical.
Yeah, and I like how you're tying or connecting the dots between marketers and being able to differentiate, because I do think the marketing function is responsible for a lot of that outward communication. Obviously, your program and curriculum development needs to be tied together, but the first touch point, or building that awareness of how you're differentiating, I think does ultimately come down to the marketing folks and the marketing function. So
Right.
Yeah, I'd love to see more of that function increase and also get more value tied to it,
Right.
which is good, because I know I'm hearing the word CMO more on this podcast, which I used to not at all 2 years ago. So I think we're moving in the right direction. So it's good to hear that.
I mean, it's this push and pull, because at the end of the day, the product really should be differentiated. It's going to make it so much easier to market it if a school has, market aligned programs and gives students what they're looking for, which is not the case in most institutions. We're not as market aligned as we should be. So the role of a marketer then is not to just promote what the institution is putting in front of us, but also to influence what the institution does in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of product. And I think marketers, this is one of my soapbox things, right? Like marketers are too often seen as order takers and as just, the communications team spends most of their time sort of on internal communications, the poster for the faculty member's birthday party or something like that, instead of actually being asked for their expertise, which is what are students and their families looking for? What does the data tell us about that? And then also being leveraged as influencers in a cross-functional way that breaks down those silos between academic affairs and enrollment and advancement and student affairs. And that's really the exciting work that CMOs are increasingly getting to do or insisting that they do.
Should be doing.
And the differentiation that we're looking for, that we're talking about, is then an end result of that work, which means really research and data and influence on the internal side.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I think maybe your book talks a little bit more about this, but I think that getting marketing a seat at the table is a topic I continue to talk about on this podcast, especially with marketing leaders. And I think the North Star of that is not just having influence in the strategic planning, but also like being involved with the programming that institutions and colleges offer. So
totally,
I love talking about this.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Well, great.
Silos. Yeah.
Kind of going back a little bit more towards the differentiation that we were focusing on is, so you mentioned that differentiation used to be more about geography, demographics, selectivity, and religion, but the last 20 years that's changed. So what are people more attached to these days?
Yeah, I think we're still thinking about higher education along those same lines, but how much each of them matters has changed. And then there's also fewer students to go around. And so when you think about needing to attract new audiences rather than audiences that have always been your audience, you have to look different to them than your competitors. And in order to look different to them than your competitors, you have to have some perspective. You have to almost position your institution like a movement, right? Or like something that's going to reflect the identity of the person or the aspirational identity that this person has. So you can go about this in many ways. You can spend $1 million on a brand project. So many institutions are doing that, right? And they have those resources to tell those stories in a big way. But I think our presentation was more focused on the smaller teams that are a little bit more resource trapped, that have to differentiate with imperfect tools and imperfect resources. And so what we then really hone in on is that storytelling and telling real stories, right? I'm not talking about testimonials that you plaster all over your website, like 2 lines. Would recommend this school to anyone. I got my job at this institution or this organization, and I would recommend this to you. Really more of like a raw and vulnerable approach to storytelling, where a story has an arc and really tells a hero's journey. One institution that does this super, super well is Purdue Global. They have the overarching brand, the sub-brand for Purdue Global is "This is my comeback," because they're really focused on adult learners and professional audiences who have maybe, stopped out and they need to come back to complete their undergraduate degree, or they're coming back as lifelong learners to continue trying to get a leg up in the professional world through a grad degree, a certification, or something like that. And so this notion of a comeback, I think, is really powerful and very psychographic, where people are grappling with, have I failed? Can I still make something more of myself? Am I up for it? Is it going to be too hard? And then telling real stories about real people around, I didn't think it was possible to do this because I have little kids. I didn't think it was possible to do this because I didn't think I could afford it. I had imposter syndrome. I had all these different hurdles that people encounter. And then the stories that they tell are like longer form stories that have, like I said, that hero's journey and that arc, that are really vulnerable and that allow you to connect with them. I think that's differentiating, because the people we tell those stories about only exist on your campus, whether they're your students, your alumni, or even your faculty. There's a whole kind of arsenal of content that we can create around our faculty as well and their thought leadership. that only we can have, right? Because this faculty member doesn't teach anywhere else. And getting prospective students to really kind of get hooked on those stories, and telling those stories well is one way that we can differentiate with less, monetary investment than we would have to put together if we were to do a big brand project. Or we talk a lot now about storytelling at scale, and how is AI going to factor into that, and making everything personalized. And yes, and at the same time, we still have to do the really hard work of bringing those stories to life, and that requires more than putting together a spreadsheet and asking your students to put in their testimonial and signing the waiver.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And when you're putting these stories together, like, is each college of, like, let's say the business school and the engineering school, are they the ones responsible for coming up with like, what's a great model to help actually get to the content creation part of the story?
Yeah, that's all.
Creation?
People are always like, okay, we get it. Like, we need better stories. We need to tell longer stories.
Yeah.
We need to have an arc, but how do we actually pull this off? Because it sounds daunting. So that's always the first question. And I think coordinating in a cross-functional manner, and really taking we call this like a brand journalism approach, right? Where instead of just saying, okay, I'm a marketer, I need testimonials, here's my spreadsheet, like I was just saying, having a reporter or even a small team of reporters, and this can even be done with the help of student workers, which is really exciting, right? Because they know firsthand what it's like to be on our campus right now, and they know people who have good stories to tell. But going and really doing more of like a long form interview with students and alumni and faculty that fit into the story framework. So this requires probably an hour to 2 hours with each person. You can bring video into that. If you're interviewing them anyway, grab video, grab a photo, get them to sign the release form, do it all at once, figure out what's the hook, how is the story going to fit into your bigger framework. And yeah, it's going to take some work, right? But it can be really exciting to really get to know this person and what is their unique story, and then you can leverage it all over your funnel. That's another problem where we're seeing a lot of disjointment in the marketing funnel, where we have some storytelling potentially, we have something on a website, or we have a little bit on social media, but it doesn't get carried through into the digital ad side. It doesn't get carried through into the drip campaigns that people get once they inquire or apply. And so thinking of storytelling, if you want it to be truly differentiating, storytelling throughout the entire marketing funnel, instead of an ad that says, pursue your passion and has an image of a building, right? Like, tell a story in an ad, like use the hook of this is my comeback or something like that, and make it psychographic, make it elicit an emotion. Tell that story in a little bit of a longer way on the landing page. Continue telling that story in the drip campaign so that it's not as salesy and stale anymore. I mean, I've done secret shopping for like dozens of institutions where I've been signing up for all of their nurture streams. And the typical autoresponder that you get 10 minutes after you fill out like an inquiry form, right, is, we're so glad you're interested in our school. Here are all the reasons it's great. And then it's just like 7 bullet points, and it's a list that doesn't even talk, the bullets don't even talk to each other, right? It's just literally a list of bullets. And, meet with us and learn more. And it's like, no, I just signed up. I want to learn more. I don't want the generic list. I want a story. I want connection. And so few institutions deliver those stories and that connection at that really critical point. So I think putting the work into it once a semester to get 5 to 10 really high quality stories that correlate to, priority programs or priority brand pillars that you want to promote, and just continue building that arsenal, and then having everything flow out from that can be incredibly impactful.
Yeah, and I really liked your actual example of your auto response to the inquiry submission. There's zero personalization, right? So like there's a huge opportunity there, which ties a little bit together with connecting with students and seeing themselves in whatever you're talking about. If you're submitting inquiry to the business school for a specific program, you can personalize that a little bit more towards the programming or whatever the request is. So definitely
Right.
good. Speaking of tactical, I know that in your presentation you go over a very effective differentiation framework. Could you cover that real quickly with us?
Well, there are three frameworks. The first one has to do with market research. So that's a four-pronged approach that we say, speaking of marketers
That's the
needing
one,
a
yes.
seat at the table, um, and needing to influence the product before we're even asked to market it. So the four-pronged approach to market research that we use, and again, right, like you could spend $250,000 on a really expensive study, but here's how you can do it yourself, right? So you can start by doing some brand anthropology. That's the first piece. And brand anthropology is really just this idea that you understand what has always been at the core of your brand. So Northeastern, even though they're now a global brand that has campuses all over the world, they've always had experience at the heart of their brand. And now they're the experience university. But they used to be a commuter school, right? And now they're this like top ranked school, but they're still the experience university. And they've never veered away from that. That's brand anthropology. Elon is another really great transformation story in higher ed that I love to talk about. They were a Christian school. They had a mascot called the Fighting Christian, and now they've graduated that Fighting Christian. They've become actually a non-religiously affiliated school. They're a multi-faith campus now, and their mascot is the Phoenix. And the reason that they chose the Phoenix is because there was a fire in 1923 where the campus burned down, and sort of they rose from the ashes and rebuilt, just like they are rebuilding and reinventing themselves now that they've shed that formal Christian affiliation. That's another example of brand anthropology. Is really inspiring, right? So really understanding what is it in our past, where is like that kind of core myth that we can carry into the future, making sure that it's really relevant to what students are looking for. So that's brand anthropology. Then, of course, doing competitor analysis, so really understanding which are the institutions that your institution is losing students to, or your programs is losing students to, right? 5 to 7 institutions, and understand, what are their price points, what is their mode that they're offering these degrees in. Is it online? Is it hybrid? Is it in person? Is it 16 months, 12 months, 2 years for masters, right? Like, how long does it take to complete the degree, and how can you do it? What are their value propositions, and what are the gaps in your competitive segment that you could potentially fill? Oftentimes that opportunity actually in the graduate space is hybrid programs. So I'm hoping that many more institutions are going to move toward that because it's such a win-win. And then the third pillar of that four-pronged approach is labor market demand analysis. So understanding tools, like Lightcast or Bureau of Labor Statistics, even LinkedIn, understanding like what are employers looking for from degrees like this. What are the competencies, the outcomes that we need to make sure are in place here? And then the flip side of that is the student demand analysis. So looking at iPads, understanding, maybe doing some qualitative research, quantitative research, primary research that helps you understand what are students looking for. And taking that and putting it into action and saying, okay, maybe we need to launch a few new degrees. Maybe we need to think about how to take the degrees that we currently have, especially in the liberal arts and the humanities, and create some win-wins for students where they get that really amazing liberal arts education, but they have concrete competencies and skills and credentials that are linked to that. And doing that hard work of really understanding your academic portfolio based on those four approaches. That's going to lead to a differentiated academic portfolio. And then from a marketing perspective, we also have in the presentation sort of a method for messaging and creative and a method for digital advertising that continues to make sure that you're differentiated at every step of the way.
No, this is fascinating, and I actually think it's interesting that first that you even added student demand analysis and labor market demand analysis in here, because I think it's so critical towards higher education that I know I speak to this a lot with our guests on the podcast, but really speaking more towards what value we provide, what are the products that we sell in the form of education, and those are the outcomes, right? And so I like that you focus on this. And this reminds me of a conversation I had. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, yes, I've been in conversations with president cabinets or provosts, and people who run higher education institutions who still struggle with the notion that we would study what the labor market and what the student demand is, right? Because we used to be the deciders of what should matter as institutions. Like we used to curate what higher education should be, and we would say, take it or leave it, people. You know, that was this idea of like exclusivity and prestige were all that was tied to us deciding what mattered and what didn't matter. But that's fantasy land. That is no longer the reality. We need to understand what the market wants. And there are still institutions that can get away with this idea that they should be deciding what matters to a certain extent, the really selective ones and really wealthy institutions, but even they can't do it to the extent that they have been doing it. So yeah, not thinking that the labor market, and I'm going to start again because my stupid computer did that. Thinking that you can afford not to pay attention to the labor market and to student demand is extremely naive. And the institutions that are not doing it now will really regret it in 5 years and in 10 years. I think many of them will close as a result of not doing that now.
Yeah, no, this is fascinating. And the conversation I was bringing up was with, I think, the new director of marketing at CU Boulder's engineering school for graduates, and how they're seeing a lot of student demand is still existing for computer science, but the actual labor market, at least as they're seeing locally here or regionally, is that there actually isn't a lot of labor market demand for computer science, and there's actually more demand for other programs. And I don't know if I was at Labor to Speak, but there's two or three other programs that are doing really well in the labor market. So part of her job was to try and market those other programs more, knowing that there's a gap in the student demand in the labor market, and that it'll actually be better for the student upon their graduation.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that about computer science. In an ideal world, I guess like student demand would track the labor market demand a little bit, right? It would be like, oh,
right.
Suddenly there are a lot of jobs in this, so now there's a lot of student demand, and I haven't studied closely how those correlate. But I think there is also still really healthy demand around the humanities and the liberal arts, which is one of my sort of passion points, because I was an English major and I studied history, and I loved just immersing myself in the things that I was passionate about as a student, which wasn't computer science or STEM or nursing or the things that now if you want a job, you kind of can look up, okay, what should I study? I never thought that way. I was like, I want to study what I'm passionate about. And I think that there's absolutely a path for institutions to enable that for students, like I said before, but make sure that there is sort of a parallel path where they're also obtaining credentials that are going to be really high value in the labor market. And I know that that's a topic that many institutions are talking about, but I don't think many are actually pulling it off, because it does require kind of doing away with some archaic academic affairs practices, and you need to get faculty buy-in, and you need to plan it and implement it, which is where most good ideas kind of die in higher ed, because it's just really difficult to get things done. So yeah, I think the institutions who can figure out how to align with the student and labor market demand, and then also how, this is another thing, right? You could really figure out how to implement strategy, which is why my whole book is about leadership. You can have the best strategy, but if you can't lead the strategy, if you can't implement it, then it's not going to be worth much. The institutions that can figure out how to actually study the market and then implement what they find are going to be the winners. And they're going to be differentiating as a side effect of that work that they're doing.
And I would also argue with that, and saying that if you are a smaller institution, maybe that's not a net negative, because the positive side to that is maybe you can move a little bit faster than the larger institutions in switching your programming. Maybe, but I'm just throwing it out there.
I mean, yeah, it depends on the.
I see you're shaking your head.
Well, no, I like small institutions. I went to a small, tiny liberal arts school, and it was absolutely the right fit for me. And I think there's that demand isn't going to go away for those small institutions. I don't know if they can necessarily move faster. That one I'm not sold.
I'd hope, I guess.
But I think they're going to have a place in the market. It's just going to be there are going to be fewer of them because there are fewer students. So it's just going to be harder for them to survive unless they pay attention to strategy and research.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a fabulous conversation. I really enjoyed it. I'm wondering where our listeners can connect with you and learn about all the things you're doing. I know you have a couple different streams, so
Oh,
if you
sure.
want to share anything, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. I post there almost every day. So you can find me at Suzan Brinker, S as in Sam, U, Z as in zebra, A, N as in Nancy, and then Brinker, Brinker on LinkedIn. And then I'm also newly on Blue Sky, which is exciting. It feels like we've taken a time machine and taken it back to what Twitter was in 2009. So finding my way around Blue Sky. And of course, we have our website at VivHigherEd, VIVHIED.com. You should be able to find me if you want to reach out. You'll be successful, I have no doubt. And I look forward to hearing from you if you choose to do that.
Amazing. Well, thanks again for your time, and thanks for our audience for listening in.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
It was amazing. Appreciate it. I love always talking about strategic planning.